Hi, everyone. Welcome to Career Lab session. Watch your mentors interview each other. We're going to have a mock technical interview, so you'll get to see both sides of the role, and it won't be you doing it, so it'll be very low pressure. And then there'll be enough time at the end for questions, anything you have specifically, and we'll also kind of debrief the whole thing of what was great, what was good, what you can build out on. Before we start that, though, I'm going to share the repo and just do a quick check-in to make sure. Okay, all your faces are gone. Can you just see the screen and not my dashboard? Perfect. So, oh, hang on. You probably can't see this, but this is blocking me, so I'm gonna move you over there. So we finished week 1. Hopefully everyone's finished and well into week 2. You've done your LinkedIn. You got a review from a mentor. Hopefully you had a chance, if everything wasn't perfectly clear, to ask questions back and forth, and you're ready to go with that. If you weren't able to make it to Navigating Finances, we've got the recording. It's linked right here. So definitely take a look at that at any time, in a couple of weeks, a couple of months, whenever you feel like, if you didn't come see it live. The QA with the recruiter, the live sync session had to be canceled because of scheduling, but I had last cohorts recording with Yosha, so it's terrific. If you haven't seen it, check that out. The link is also there. And now this is this week. So the whole weekend was asynchronous, starting to prepare yourself for the interviews, going over the questions and looking at a take-home assignment. And this particular take-home assignment, your mentors have looked at too. So they're going to be using it as the basis for this mock. You've probably already looked at it, but just in case you haven't, there's a link to the repo. You want to clone it and work for an hour, maybe 2, no more. We don't want you to build. You can feel free at any time to turn it into anything you want, put it on your portfolio page. But just for this process, spend an hour or so working through it, and then you're going to take it to your mock interview with your mentor, whoever you were partnered with, and then have a technical interview, just like we're about to see. We've got some questions here that we're calling a rubric, which basically keep these in mind as you go, because all of these questions are fair game in the interview. So you'll want to prepare some answers, but also, use these as a guide while you're going through the process to make sure that you've kind of at least thought of each thing. If you don't have time to do it, you can talk about it in your interview. That's a super valuable technique during interviewing. The rest of this week is going to be not asynchronous, but the synchronous star, I call it, where you're going to be meeting up with your partners to do your mock interviews, as much or as little as you need. So your pair interview practice is another Collab that you can ask questions of. You can quiz each other, dig into it any way that feels right for you. And then you have a job fit mock and a technical mock. And those you need to schedule. I've gotten a couple messages from volunteers or mentors that have said they haven't heard from their Collab. So just send them a message. Use the DM in the direct message in Slack. Send them a message and say, hey, when are you available? These are my general time frames, and come up with a time that hopefully works. Might be tricky. We've got some time zone challenges. So somebody might be early in the morning or late at night, but try and give it your best shot. Give them the biggest window you can. And then next Sunday, we meet up to celebrate you and what you've done, and for you to give us feedback if there's anything we can do better. So that's it for my check-in. Let's now find where I pushed the thing. Okay, there we go. So that's it for my spiel. We're going to jump right in. If you don't know them, EJ and Nick are both, amazing people, amazing developers, and amazing mentors for the Collab Lab. And so they've very generously volunteered to play your roles and the role of interviewer for a tech interview. So without further ado, if you're both ready, take it away.
Okay.
Thanks, Shelly.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
I was gonna say, hi, how are you doing today, EJ? Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for hopping on the call. Let me go over quickly the format of what we're going to do today, just the schedule, and then we can jump into it. And if you have any questions at the end, my time's all yours. So first, we have some questions I'm going to ask, which I think you were given a bit of a preview of the kinds of questions you might hear today. So hopefully you're not too worried, but don't sweat. I know me saying don't sweat, it's not going to take away all the sweat, but we're here to have fun. So don't worry about it too much.
Yeah,
If
thanks.
you're ready for the questions, we can jump in. But anything you want to ask before we get into it?
No, it seems pretty clear so far. So yeah, let's just go ahead.
Sweet. All right. So first, I have some questions in the category of accessibility for you. Number one, what are some tools that you can use to test accessibility in your web pages or web applications?
Yeah, I typically right now use some browser extensions or developer extension tooling.
Mhm.
There's some great ones like the Axe Dev Tools, which you can find it in the Chrome Web Store or the Firefox. I forget what the extension store for Firefox is called.
I don't know what it's called either.
Yeah, WebAIM also has an extension, I believe. I typically
Mhm.
use Axe with Deck, and then but I do use like color contrast tools, which I typically just go to the WebAIM website for that. Maybe there's a better
Mhm.
way to do that, but I just seem to default to that. So
Yeah. How would you say those are part of your process usually?
yeah, it's I mean, typically to the best of my abilities, I'll write stuff with semantic markup, but
Mhm.
you know, I'm not perfect. I'm gonna miss something probably. So, what's really handy with the deck or DQ, sorry, I'm saying it in French. The DQ Axe dev tooling is you can actually kind of run a report on it, and since it's a browser
Mhm.
extension, it can actually add information onto the web page, so you can see stuff like, oh, this page is missing a header, or you know,
Mhm.
there's a skip link missing, or this image doesn't have alt text, if it makes sense. um,
Mhm.
and sometimes that can be overwhelming if there's a lot going on, because like if I'm working on, because like it might be a feature I'm doing, but there might be existing stuff in there from previous stuff. So you can actually kind of filter things out. Like you can say, just show me the error, show me what's good,
Mhm.
what isn't. So I kind of like to do that to kind of drill down, because sometimes it's just overwhelming with all the information on the page. So
Right. Yeah, totally agree. You actually brought up my next question, so good job. Um, how would you say if you were like to describe to a teammate or even someone who's less senior to you how alt attributes on images are used? What would you say?
yeah, if it makes sense that the image needs to have a description, you definitely need to have one. There are cases, and I think this is like kind of, it depends, but like some images don't need alt text. But
Mhm.
having said that, you still have to have the alt attribute and just leave it empty, like with quotes.
Yep.
And that just signals to like a screen reader that, okay, I guess there's an image here, but I don't need to do anything. I don't need to tell you anything about it, because maybe it doesn't help improve the context of whatever you're reading.
Yeah.
But if you are using alt text, um, it's, again, it depends here, but you know, describe as best as you can what's going on in that particular
Mhm.
image for the context of what you're doing. It doesn't mean write the great American novel of like literally there's three blades of grass between this and so on, you know.
Yeah. Mhm.
But you know, something reasonable. And if the other thing is, if you are describing an image, you don't need to preface the text with, this is an image of, because the screen reader already knows it's an image, so it's just going
Mhm.
to tell you
Mhm.
what it is. That's
Yeah.
probably the best way I would go about describing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's there is a sort of certain artistry to writing alt text content in the same way there's an
Yeah.
artistry to writing copy for a UI or for an application. You know, we have copywriters for that, we have designers for that. Um, one of the challenges I really struggle with and also enjoy is trying to decide what the meaning of an image is so that you can decide what the
Yeah.
important parts are to describe, because it's not always obvious. It's not always literal either. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
as a bonus question, just because I'm curious about the technical details here, do you know what happens if you don't provide an alt attribute to an image?
I believe, I'm not positive about this, but I imagine the image won't show up in the accessibility tree. I'm not positive about that though.
We can get into the tree thing later. That's a whole separate line of discussion, but it does show up in the accessibility tree. What
Okay.
happens is the browser will use the asset's file name as the alt
Oh,
attribute.
okay. Okay.
So,
Okay, so that's why
it,
we need to have the empty text if it's not, doesn't
yes.
make sense.
Hmm.
Okay,
hmm
yeah, yeah.
hmm
I
So
learned that
it's
today.
extra
Thank you.
critical to do that because, as I'm sure you've experienced before, sometimes we have really weird names for our assets when we're developing something. So
Yeah.
those names could have no information or could make things worse if they appear in the user's experience of the content.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No. Wow. No, that's good to know. I didn't know that. So
Yeah,
now I know the reason for
I
the
learned
empty
the
text.
hard way one day when I was debugging something, and I was like, why is it called this? Oh, that's the name of the file on my hard disk. I didn't even know.
Oh, cool, cool, cool. Thanks
You're
for
doing
sharing.
great so far for whatever it's worth. So don't, like I said, we can't reduce all the sweat, but take some of it out here. We'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah. Here, hold on a sec. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Next question, sort of in the spirit of getting things right for our users. When would you use a link versus a button?
Yeah. I'd say this is pretty much always the case. If you're using a link like an anchor tag, it's because you're going somewhere. So for example, I'm on my website and I have a link that goes to maybe a talk I gave or something.
Mm-hmm.
A button is typically used for an action, like for example, you're submitting a form. It's performing some kind of action instead of navigating. And I would
Mm-hmm.
say 99% of the time, that's how you should treat it. I know we're not talking about buttons, but I had to explain the button to give the explanation for the link.
Yeah, no, I hear
Uh,
you.
and because there's weird things too that you can do. Because like this ties back to like a screen reader and the accessibility tree. Like if I put a button to go to a link, like I could have text on the button that says go to this page, but then I have to add an additional on-click event to say change the page to go to there. So not only is it less accessible, you're also actually doing more work. So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
not even really necessary and adds potential complexity.
Yeah, totally. I really like that you summarized it as asking yourself whether you're doing navigation, because that's like the biggest question that sort of does the decision tree for you, if you will. Like, there are so many things you could do with JavaScript or with an application, but if you're taking a user somewhere or even getting something from somewhere else, because there are download links, right? Technically speaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing is, are you going to get something or taking a user somewhere? And also, obviously, going to get something is also kind of like a vague thing because buttons can be used to
Yeah.
fetch data. But the idea being, are you linking to an asset somewhere else on the web? Are you taking a user somewhere? That's probably a link. If you use that as a guidepost, I think you'll get it right most of the time.
Yeah, and we're saying link here too, but like the URL is typically like what a link is, like HTTPS something. If you get even more general, it's considered a resource. So it's like, are you going to a particular resource? Because I just thought of that because you're mentioning the download. So like you can actually download a link because you can add get kind of going off tangent here, but like you can add a download attribute to an anchor tag to say don't navigate to it, actually tell the browser to download it. So anyways, I digress.
No, yeah, that's cool. That's a good point, because it also turns into a lot of it depends, like you've been saying throughout our discussion here. So it really comes back to that all the time. Next question. What are ARIA attributes and how are they useful?
Yeah. So area attributes, they're HTML attributes for elements on a page. They're area dash and whatever that particular area attribute is. They're used to make things accessible, but I would definitely strongly suggest do not use them unless you absolutely have to. And so for example, what I mean is like, and again, the funny thing about all this is like whenever you potentially use these, you're always introducing more complexity when you could lean on semantic markup instead. So like, for example, I could create a div and then I could say it's a button, and then like you can that's a role, so you could say role equals button, but then you can have like area dash pressed and so on. You can have all these you can do all these things that are technically accessible, but it's not necessary. So the way I would frame it is, even though they can make things more accessible, lean on the semantic markup that you're given. And if you're working on a very complex component, that's typically where I've seen them used heavily, because just based on what you're doing, like, divs are typically frowned upon, but there's scenarios where they make sense. Other elements too, but you might have to kind of massage the component you build into an accessible experience.
Totally. Can you think of a concrete example of something you've built or, a scene in the wild that where the ARIA was a good idea and like necessary?
Yes, I have a very concrete example. So I used to work at dev.to, which is
Hmm.
a programming platform. And if you've ever been to that site, we have an editor. It's a Markdown editor, and I worked with my coworker Suzanne Aitchison, who is a accessibility expert, and we created an autocomplete. So like when you're in the editor and you're writing your text and then you want to at somebody, like to say, hey, I read this great article from at Nikki T Online, which is my handle over
Hmm.
there. What it would do is as soon as you pressed at, you would all of a sudden get this list, and then it would populate. And we did use some third-party components from a great project called Reach UI, but basically to be able to create that experience in an accessible manner, it required area attributes and also just a set of components. In like on the surface, it looks very simple, but under the
Hmm.
hood, it's very complex. There's all other kinds of things like knowing where the cursor is, focus state. There's
Hmm. Hmm.
because like if you're in the editor has focus, but as soon as you go at something, the little drop down that pops up has to get focus, and then when you're finished it has to
Hmm.
return the focus back. Basically it's super complicated,
Yeah.
but that's like a great place where you do something like that. And the nice thing about this is, and we can share it after the call, is this is all open source, so you can actually go look at it if you wanted to.
Yeah, I would love to see more about it. I would love to talk more about the details of this implementation too, but I also want to make most of our time for your
Yeah,
take home project, so we can come back to it if you don't mind.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. It's very hard to do. You've got the focus for the browser and also like the focus for the assistive technology. Those are
Mhm.
two separate things, and they have to track together. It's a whole thing. Um, but this is great. And I have one more question, and then we're going to sort of switch into more general React stuff.
Okay.
Um, if you're working with a junior developer who's sort of kind of implementing their own UI stuff, and you were giving them design advice, there's this very simple sort of standard for design which says that color alone is not sufficient for describing UI. So how would you explain that to somebody and why that's important?
Yeah, I would give a concrete example. My brother-in-law is colorblind, and when he goes to traffic lights, uh, it's not all traffic lights are like this now, which is unfortunate. But when I was growing up, there was a square, a circle, and a triangle. The
Oh yeah, I like that.
triangle was a yellow light to slow down. The
Hmm.
circle was green to go, and the square was red for stop. So basically he only sees like shades of reddish things. And so like
Hmm.
basically if he ended up on a website where there was similar colors potentially, not having some kind of icon or symbol to indicate what something is
Hmm.
could be detrimental to an experience. So and these are things I understand why they're forgotten a lot. It's because people who don't have these problems do not think about them, which is
Hmm.
another topic, but that's why you want to
Yeah.
have an accessible set of people working with you. So
Yeah. I've never seen a traffic stop like that. That might is that maybe only you're in Canada, right?
yeah, maybe it is only in Canada, but I will say the more recent ones I've seen, they don't seem to do that anymore, and I'm not sure why.
That's a shame.
Um,
I mean,
yeah.
if we're being really technical, I think that the ones that you see in the States, which are vertically stacked circles, technically they're still accessible in that the position of the light kind of
Okay,
changes
you
your
learn.
meaning of what, but still the shapes also add another layer of distinction, which I think would
Yeah,
be really glanceable. In UX design, the glanceable is something like, can you look at this and quickly get a bunch of information? And so I think adding a shape is
yeah,
another layer of distinction. Um,
yeah.
for my teachers in the audience, I'm sure you're nodding, like shapes, yes, shapes, good distinction. Uh, no, yeah, thank you. I learned something today about traffic stops.
Also,
So,
Montreal
but
drivers are pretty violent, so maybe that's why it's
yeah,
like that.
exactly. You want a very quick bit of information, don't you?
Yeah,
Um, moving more into general React, which I know you used to build for take home. So I think you got this. Like I said, you got this. It's totally fine. Again, in a scenario where you're working with a teammate or especially someone who's junior to you, how would you describe state and props and how they are best used in React?
yeah. So although the names are different, they really are all some form of state for components. even though those names are state and props. The main difference is the state keyword. When you're using it in a React component, it means component state, which means it doesn't rely on a parent component or some kind of external state to provide to itself. So examples of this could be like, I have a pop-up menu. I don't need to pass a prop in for that. Probably I could just say like, is this open, is it closed, and it's the component itself dictating it. For props, it's typically state that comes from a parent element or a parent's parent element, and it gets passed down. That's like the short of how I would distinguish the two. And and both are supposed to be immutable, which there's paradigms in React to do that. Props, you can't alter them, but even if you alter these things, they won't actually cause the page to re-render, because the way React works is it's going to go, I'm not aware that you changed. So which could be a source of confusion for people sometimes if they're not familiar with the paradigm.
Yeah, there's like this trap where you have to use React's own models and methods for updating data inside of a React component. Otherwise, it doesn't do what you want. It could do nothing at all or do a weird thing. That's not at all what you wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. I heard once someone describe state as a component's memory. If a component has to memorize something or memorize something between renders, that's something that really helped me get it. And so I always think of like a light switch, the simplest thing that you can have as a state in your house. The switch can be either on or off. And props come in for more complex machines where you have to externally influence the machine from the outside.
Yeah, I like that.
I like imagining like a robot, or like I can't remember what they're called, but they're not Legos, but they move like a Kinects or something. At least in the States, I used to make those as a kid, and so I would always think back to like, what can I do to the machine externally to move it or cause it to change internally? That's kind of how props can be thought of as separate from state in my mental model.
Yeah, no, I like that you mentioned that, because whatever lets the concept sink in for you, I think that's the best thing. It doesn't have to be the same as somebody else.
For me, it's always toys, I guess. That's what it always comes back to. Okay, one more question. This is just more of kind of hearing your thoughts on React concepts. What are hooks used for?
Yeah, so getting back to state, which we were talking about, this is a way to kind of package up a component's memory, as you were saying, or the state. And the neat thing about this is, because prior to hooks in React, you would typically have all this state logic built into a component, and if you wanted to use it somewhere else, you could refactor it into something like a function potentially, but it's really typically localized to it. And the thing that hooks gives you is you can create these generic sets of state that any component can consume, which is kind of nice. Think of it like Lego blocks for memory, like kind of like adding more RAM into your computer or something, I guess. And the thing I like about it too is you can create super complex logic, and then you can encapsulate it in a hook, and then that thing still stays complex, but from the person consuming it, which is typically an application developer, they'll be like, okay, use dark mode or use keyboard something, and then they just have to manage that. Okay, this is what the state is, and I can set it. And then I think that's super powerful with hooks.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I like that you mentioned like hiding logic too, because it's when you're building a large or complex app and you're working with teammates who maybe don't know all the code or the same code as you do, which is very common. You don't want someone to have to see all of the internals of something that is not really relevant to their work. And so if you can kind of put it in a place that it's packaged nicely and it's by itself, one, you kind of spare your teammates the cognitive load, if you will, of having to parse all that extra code. And two, you make it into a thing you can test, which is very nice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we didn't talk about the testing.
You mentioned like a use dark mode hook. So how would that roughly, if you give me like a verbal walkthrough of how would you do that?
Yeah, so I think nowadays, because modern CSS is pretty powerful, I think the way I would implement something like that is I would have like you would probably have some kind of theming set up in your CSS, typically using CSS properties. Even if you use Tailwind or something, that still
Mhm.
surfaces all these CSS properties that you can manipulate. So the neat thing about modern CSS is you can literally change like one CSS property and it can cascade and change your entire experience. So I think
Yeah.
for the use dark mode, the way I would do it is, so we didn't talk about it, but like a hook typically will return a destructured array that has like the state itself and then a
Mhm.
function to set that state.
Mhm.
So so basically when I would say set turn on dark mode or something, I think what I would do is I would, in that custom hook, I would either toggle on or off the dark mode, and you can actually set a CSS property via JavaScript. So
Mhm.
that's probably what I would do in the use dark mode, and then so like almost everything is in your CSS because you just don't need to do that in JavaScript, but you can manipulate that one property or CSS class to say, okay, the body add the dark mode class, or set some kind of CSS property on the body to say I'm in dark mode now, or whatever theme. And it's just that small piece of logic that you change in JavaScript and you get a whole new experience. So that's probably how
Yeah.
I would tackle that.
No, yeah, it makes sense. Thank you for giving me that answer. If we have more time, I would love to go into that detail, but I want to also again shift gears to your take home. So, would you mind sharing your
Yeah.
screen with the app?
Yeah, sure.
I
Okay.
have it pulled up locally, but that way we can go over it together if you're looking at it.
Yeah.
Um,
So okay.
cool. I can see everything.
Uh,
Um,
yeah.
how
Okay.
was this? Did you enjoy doing it? Was any of the instructions confusing?
The instructions were super clear. I'm just gonna zoom in a bit because I'm on a wide screen. So just people watching, just let me know if you can see things properly.
I can
Okay.
see things pretty well. Anyone have any?
Okay.
Is this good for everyone? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so as Shelly was mentioning at the beginning of the recording, uh, don't spend more than 1 or 2 hours on this. I probably spent about an hour and a half to 2 hours, but it was broken up in like 2 or 3 sessions just because I had some things going on. Um, and to be clear, it's a take home, so this is not like a full-fledged like battle tested application. We can talk about stuff that I might have wanted to do if if this were like given more time or like an actual feature to finish. But I did like a best effort to demonstrate the good enough, like the MVP of what would make sense for this take home. Um,
Mhm.
Okay, so yeah, so I read the README and I just wanted to make sure I knew what the criteria was for the project, because you can
Mhm.
obviously be liberal with what you'd like to do, but I wanted to follow the instructions to a T because that's typically what would happen if you're given something. You can obviously discuss it with people, but given this was a take home, I just assumed it would already been decided what the feature set or bug fixes were supposed to be. So I'm gonna just come here to the project. So the first issue was when you search for things, and I'm just gonna disable it, but there was an issue where you submit the form and then it refreshes the page and then loads. And this happens with like a normal web page, but we're building our website, but we're building a single page application at the moment. So that doesn't really work in this particular scenario. So the ask was to make sure that the page doesn't refresh. So I'm going to
Mhm.
just go to see. Okay. So basically I'm going to disable this. The way I prevented it from refreshing is using the events pre-event default method. So
Mhm.
I'm just going to disable this for a second. I'm running the dev server right now, so it will refresh the page and I can make the changes back after. But I'm going to just type in cat here and I'm going to say search. And you might have not seen it because it happened very quickly, but the page did refresh. I could actually open the dev tools to maybe make that more clear. You're going to see it actually submitted a page, and that's not what we want, or that's what the ask was for this particular take home. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back. And what's going to happen now is when I submit the form, it's going to say, okay, I'm submitting the form, but don't do prevent the default action, which is actually to submit it back to the web server. We're going to handle everything client side. So now when I go to search, it's going to give me results. Now, before you saw like when it loaded the page again, it didn't actually provide the results. And the reason was because we don't have a back-end server actually giving us the results. We're calling a API for the, I think it's the Chicago Art Museum. So, okay. So there's that. So the next thing, I'm just going to kind of just go through what we had here. So we need to create a search artworks function. And what this does is makes a get request. So this means I want to go somewhere and I want to get information back. Think of like if you're doing a Google search, same kind of idea. There is a for the local development, it was suggested to return the values from the JSON file, because if you do too many requests, basically you could get, it's what's called rate limiting, which means like we don't have an API key, so we're only given so many requests to this resource because it's free. So the creators of the project generated like the results from like an original request, I guess, to the art service, and it's in the form of JSON. So this allows us to do local development without having to worry about not getting results back.
And even leaving out rate limiting, it's also polite to not bother their API if we don't need to while we're developing. So it was a nice thing for them to put in there.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so basically there's this search artwork. So if we go to this, you're going to see here, I'm actually using the real one now because the final step of the test was to use the real one. But prior to this, it was actually just saying return the JSON that I just showed you there. Okay. And let's come back here. Okay. And so what I did was, if we go back to the next steps, so I fixed that bug with the search form being refreshed. So we needed to implement like the search form and get some details back, like get the search results back. So what I did was I created another component, which is art results. Naming is hard. Maybe this could be named better, but that's what I decided to go with. So what this particular thing does is it receives one prop here. There's different ways you can do this. You could just say props, and then you could just say here, like that. But when there's not many props in it, I just typically do it this way. Neither is right or wrong. It's just a preference. And so basically the artworks are the list of art that you get back. And then I'm because it's a list, remember, we have to remember semantic markup. So I'm using an unordered list here. And then I'm using a common pattern in React, which is you just map over an array and you generate some components there. Some things to mention here is the API returns properties with underscores. That's not typically something you do in JavaScript, but that's just what the API is returning. You could get fancy and kind of have something to clean that up before you get it, but I didn't really think it was necessary for this test. The important thing to note, though, is when we are mapping over an array to generate some JSX, is you need a key. I went with the image ID, which seems to be the main unique thing within each art piece. And within there, like we were talking before when we were talking about accessibility, I made these anchor tags because it's a link. It's going to somewhere after. And so what I did is, so there's the href, and this is a hash with the image ID. So this is, I'll get into more about this as we move on. And I have an ID here. You don't always need to use an ID in React. You could use a ref, but I decided to go with this for now. Again, there was limited time, and so I was just trying to get something in a good state. The interesting things I want to mention here is, so you can use data attributes in HTML attributes. They're considered as HTML attributes. They're considered standard as long as you do data dash something. And you can actually access them on an element by there's a .dataset property, which will actually give you all of them. So like this is data-artwork, but in JavaScript, it would be dataset.artwork, for example. What I did here is we don't have any like state management, like you may have heard of Redux before, or even some like parent state to preserve all the information. Given it was so tiny, I decided to actually stringify the artwork. So this becomes a snippet of JSON, and I'll explain how that's used after once we get into the other things here. Is everything clear there so far?
Yeah.
Okay,
Do you want to
so,
show us a search?
Yeah.
Or you can go in there too. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I'll come back to the UI. So let's come here. So let me just reload the page here. So let's look for pizza. I know it doesn't have pizza. It gave me something else Italian. So this gives me the unordered list. And I just want to show briefly the markup it returns, just to better explain what I was talking about. So let's inspect the element here. And side note for folks, if they're not aware, you can actually zoom in the dev tools as well. So you're going to see here, so that data-artwork attribute I was talking about, you can see it's all JSON there. So now if I come to the dev tools, I can do this. Whoops. Just to show you how I get the information out after. You see this actually, I can convert it into a JavaScript object, and then I have all the information about the image. So that's why I decided to go with that. And then there's other stuff in here. So I have the name of the piece of art, and it's by the user. And that's pretty much all that's going on in here. And
before we leave this I actually found what I think might have been unintended behavior in your app when I was testing it. So let's see if it still works, or if it was just maybe me. Could you search for moose, as in the mammal?
Okay.
I saw a result there. And if you hit enter and then go look at the list, list of results in the UI.
So
you know, you're good.
I got the zoom bar in my way. That's why.
Yeah.
Okay, let me close this for a sec.
Okay. Sometimes the API doesn't know or have an artist. What would you do just from a UX standpoint to handle that? What do you think you would represent to the user?
Yeah. Yeah, I was aware of this. I think what I would do is I would either I would speak to whoever is in charge of the project, but I would probably say like by unknown artist or artist unknown. Like I could basically put a default value, and like we can probably even do that real quick, just for fun. But so here, title by artist title. So what I can do here is I can give a default value, and I can say artist unknown. And so if I come back here and let's search again, let's try. Is it there? Oh, maybe it's actually null. Okay, that's why. Okay, I think it's because it's null and not undefined. They're two different things. So we could do this, and we could do this instead, and then I'll move on because I know we're pressed for time here. So this means if this is undefined or null, return this value instead. And then you can see
there you go. Awesome.
So and again, like given the time for the project, there's definitely things that I'm glad you're asking about these, because it's I would have talked about it at the end, but it's good that we're talking about it during as well.
Yeah.
So and it's not because I'm cutting corners. It's just literally there's only a certain amount of time. Okay. So we've done a search now. So now the next thing was I needed to provide an image details page. So I'll click on one of these here, and the criteria here was we needed a back button, we needed to show the image, and I also just put the information about the particular piece. And I can just show that real quickly too, image details. Okay, let's see here. Let me make that a bit bigger. So again, I'm using the pattern I like when there's not really many props. So it's just a piece of artwork, and then I'm destructuring the properties of it that I need. And in here, What I'm doing is I'm showing the image details. I'm using the article tag because it's not necessarily a blog post, but it's kind of like a relevant piece of, I guess it's article like. I'm not sure if you agree on that or not, EJ. Maybe I could have used something else. Yeah. But
that's a whole separate question, and I can answer that. But I also want to make sure you get through all the things you wanted to share.
yeah,
in
if we have
your project.
Yeah, if we have time, we'll go back to that. So in here, I'm showing the alt text as we were discussing before during the accessible part. And then there's the thumbnail height and a thumbnail width. And then there's a pattern. This was in the README. This is the pattern to display an image. And I'm using a template string, and I'm just adding the image ID in here. And that'll give us the actual URL that you see. The one thing that we'll talk about here that's interesting is I'm using a form with a back button, and I'm using some JavaScript. So there's a history object on the window of a browser, and you can program like, so when you hit the back button in your browser, it's going back in the history of what you've navigated to. You can do this programmatically as well. And so what I'm doing here is just like when we were submitting the form to do a search, I'm preventing the default action because I don't want the page to refresh because we're operating like a single page application at the moment. And I'm just saying, go back to the previous page I was at. And oh, and just side note, I typically use TypeScript, but since we weren't using TypeScript, I used the prop types package just to, while I was doing development, just to make sure I didn't forget things. That's people, I think, use this less nowadays because most people are using TypeScript, I think, but that's just a side note. But yeah, so there's not much really complex going in here aside from the back button, which is in a form. So I'm going to show you this. I'm going to click the back button, and it's going to bring me back here because it's going back in the history. Now, the one thing I want to explain here is if we come back to the app.jsx, and this could be broken down more, maybe I could import some of these things, but I just did it all within the component, the main app component for now. So there's a couple of things here. So there's this URL, if I want to add an event listener, like an event, like a click or something, you use window.add event listener or whatever element you want to add the listener to. There's a couple in regards to navigation in the browser. There's one called hash change, and hash is what I mean here. Like if we look in here again, I'll zoom that in a sec, except, okay, so you see how the href here, you see how it's hash and then the image ID. So what's happening is when I click that hash, or when I click that link, this event is going to fire. And I can show this real quickly. So app. Okay. So I'm going to use the debugger here to show this just so people can see this in action. I'm just going to zoom the app out for a second. So I'm going to click on the first one here. And you're going to see here, okay, so an event has occurred. The hash has changed in the URL. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to gather some information about the art. I know because I built it that it's hash and the image ID. So if I step through here, I can see now I have the art ID here. And then what I'm going to do is I ran into a problem trying to get it by ID. So I'm just using the document query selector. This is just a CSS selector, and it's saying, go find me an element on the page that has an href attribute that equals that particular value, which is the hash I mentioned. So what that's going to do is, if I just can continue here, okay, it's going to find this particular element. So like there's a lot of properties on there, but I can just show you real quick in here, except I don't know how to type. Okay, so what did I call that? Art anchor. Okay. So there's this art anchor, and this is actually the element on the page that I found. And you can see it has the ID that I mentioned there, the href, pound, and the image ID. So I found the right element that I want to do. And then remember how I mentioned that the artwork, I added the art as a data dash artwork. So the whole JSON string, and then I'm going to parse it. So what this does is it gives me the actual artwork in a JavaScript object now. And now we're going to talk about, you were talking about hooks before. I know if I'm going too fast, let me tell me to slow down, because I'm getting a little excited here. So now I'm going to say set current artwork. So if I come up to the top here, I have a few hooks I'm using. I didn't do anything super complex. I'm just using use state, which is one of the, I would say, primitive hooks of React. And so it has a function to set the current artwork, and I can also get the current artwork. So I'm going to set it. And when I do that, what's going to happen is the component's going to refresh, because it's going to go, I have new things that changed here. And then so what's going to happen is I'll let it run. And you didn't see it because it's going fast, but basically it just caused a re-render of the app component because some of the state changed. So now it's here, and you can see here the current artwork isn't set yet, but I'm going to run it again, and it should set it at some point. I think I might have pressed something wrong, but trust me that it does do it. So you see, okay, you see here, it's got the current artwork now, and this dictates, I'll go into the editor just because it's a little bigger. But in the app, I check if there's no current artwork, show the search form. Otherwise, if there is current artwork, I want to show the image details page, which was one of the criteria. The other thing too is I don't want to show the artwork I searched for. So I have another check here for if there's artwork but no current artwork, show the results. This logic could potentially be a little cleaner, but this was just like a quick way to do it to demonstrate things here. I'm going to close this now, and you're going to see it comes to the page, which is great. Now, some of these things I might not normally do this way, but given we're not having state management, we don't have like React Router or something. One thing, if you do notice, is this is smaller. Let me show it here. But the URL is actually localhost 3000, and it's got my hash in it. So even though I didn't go to an actual, I didn't go to a server to get an actual page, I'm able to navigate it. And this is kind of like how React Router works. This is a very rudimentary example, but I wanted to do this because to basically the URL itself is kind of a state as well. So I could use that to determine certain things. So the other thing I want to show, and then we're pretty much done here, EJ, is when I go find, where is it here? When I hit the back button, you can add state to like with the history, you can actually add state to it. So instead of storing this in like Redux or something, the browser itself can actually, in that history, actually it has the URL I was on, but it also knows like that list that I searched for before. I actually store it in there as well. And so I don't even need to make a request again. So it's not like I'm going back to the search page, making a request to the API again. I'm just, I already have it. So basically that's what's happening here. So when I pop this state, and if these names sound intimidating, it's just, these are just the names they give them. All this stuff is available on MDN, and I highly encourage you to check it out, and happy to talk about it after with people if they want to. But basically when I hit the back button, I'm in my app component, it goes, okay, the history changed. So that's what this pop state means. I went back one, and it goes, okay, I have some checks here, but like the new URL is the one that I'm currently navigating to, which is what my search page was. And then the event for this particular type of event listener has this state property, and that's that artwork that I had before. And then, so that whole part isn't React. And I wanted to mention that too, is because like, even though we're building things in React, you don't literally have to do everything in React all the time. It's okay. A lot of complex things typically will just do regular JavaScript stuff. and then wrap it in React. So what I'm doing here is I've leveraged the capabilities of the browser to get the artworks list again. And then again, these are just, I'm setting the current artwork to null because I want to update the state so that the component knows that there's no current artwork. And that artwork that I got, I'm updating its state to say I have search results again. And then once that happens, React just kicks in again and says I need to re-render the components. So if I come back here and click back now, I get the list, and this didn't actually go back to the API again, which also will save you resources. But that's basically how I tackled it. It's not perfect. Like I could probably end up in some weird states, but I just kind of wanted to showcase that I understood how React Router works fundamentally, even though this is a naive implementation. And I just wanted to also showcase some things that the browser could do that you might not be aware of, as well as leveraging some React at the same time.
Awesome. Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed reading your code. I could understand from looking at it what you were doing. I had one question about the code, but we don't have time. So I want to just close this here for questions from the audience.
Yep.
So would anyone like to ask us anything or ask Nick anything? We can end the scene here. We're back in Collab Lab mode. Anyone have anything they want to ask or talk about? Me doing Shelly's job. Shelly, if you
That's fine.
are MC again.
My favorite part was that that Nick kept going back into Collab Lab mode and teacher mode, and I loved it because that's something that you're showing how you would be as a team member, which is the most important part of these interviews. Yes, you need to know the tech. Yes, you need to, be able to answer some of the questions, but but showing how you would work with someone else is like the most important thing after being a little bit competent. That helps too. So does anyone have questions? You can just unmute, raise your hand, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. And while people are thinking about that, I can just add to what Shelly said is, like, even if I didn't finish this entire project, that doesn't mean I won't get hired. It could be like, I ran out of time, but these are things I would have liked to have done, or I got blocked on this. And like, you can flip that negative into a positive when talking to the interviewer, like, I got stuck on this. What would have you tried, because then it gets back to this whole, like, it's not you versus me. It's like, I want to work with you and I'm curious how your brain works, or like, let's see if we can figure this out. So I just wanted to mention that it's great if you do complete an assignment, but it's not always necessary. Obviously try to, but I think it's important to talk about what you got stuck on, or maybe just getting feedback about their approach. And I think you'd be surprised versus you didn't finish it and that's it, thank you kind of thing.
Yeah, especially
totally
if it's a time thing where they say only spend, I think I did an interview where it said 2.5 hours max total. You can't go a minute over, and that's what we wanted. But that also kind of gives you a great opportunity to talk about your process and why you made what decisions you made and what you would do. Like, it gives you so much meat to talk about in the interview. And you did that a couple times. Like, I did it this way because it was quick and easy and it got the job done, but given more time I would do X, Y, and Z. So it shows your thought process. Super valuable.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Well, before I forget, because we always focus on the interviewee, and that makes sense because that's your role. I'm not even from the South, but I still say y'all because it's perfect. I want to go to a couple of things that EJ did. Because as the interviewee, you want to pick up on some of those too. And it's really hard when you're nervous and anxious to pick up on those clues. But two things that he did that they did that were masterful. When you said, I don't want you to sweat, and you did something to alleviate Nick's anxiety at the first part, like coming right in, that gives you such a green flag that this is an organization that cares about their people, and that this process is not going to be, let's terrorize the new kid and see what happens, because some interviews are like that. And that's a red flag for me if an interview is like that. So when EJ did that, that's huge. The other thing, and I had to write a note so I wouldn't forget it, every time Nick responded to one of EJ's questions, after Nick was done, EJ then would like go a little further or give another example. This is a huge flag for their mentorship mentality at an organization, right? Like EJ expressed that we want to talk about this. We want to tell you other things. We want you to learn here. And anyway, so that's huge. That's the kind of organization I want to work at. So I think those were really good flags, and it was subtle. You know, it wasn't like obvious that that was being said or done.
Thank you, Shelley. I try. I also want to say, in case anyone's watching this and thinking, "Oh, this is going to be scary," there are so many ways to meet the criteria of this take home. Do not feel like you have to do it any one way or any way that you have seen or will see from other people if you're working with your peers on practicing for your interview. As long as you do your level best to accomplish the goals that are set out for you in the acceptance criteria, that's totally great. We care mainly about giving you the experience of this practice more so than we care about the concrete code that you write for this take home.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to mention one thing. Like, I still get nervous in interviews. I've been in tech since 2002, and I still get nervous at interviews. It's I think it's a completely normal reaction. People handle it differently. I tend to joke around a bit to kind of calm my nerves. I also I just talk to the interviewer as well. Like, hey, how's it going? I know not everybody likes small talk maybe, but for me, just talking to the person before we even get stuff going, it just, for me at least, it helps me kind of alleviate that potential stress I have, and it doesn't get rid of it all. Like, but I think it's 100% normal to feel. I think I feel it a lot is because a lot of times when I'm interviewing these places, like, I really want to work here, and that's why I feel that stress. So just wanted to say it's a total normal feeling, no matter where you are in your career.
I get nervous when I'm the one interviewing someone. It's like, am I going to do a good job? Am I going to hit all the right notes as an interviewer? Am I going to make someone feel like they are having an okay time? Am I going to know how to talk correctly for the hour that I'm going to be talking to this person or persons even? But no, Nick, you did a great job, obviously. I knew it would be fun because we used to work together. So I figured it would be totally great, and it was.
Yeah. Same
anyone
to
have
you,
any questions?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Anyway, any questions from anyone while we're here?
Devin's got a question. Go for it. Oh, that was just clapping, not a hand up.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
you're welcome to come off mic and clap.
It's so simple.
John, did you come off mute? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you, EJ and Nick. Awesome demonstration, and it's cool to see both sides of the interview process. I have a question regarding just how to approach interviews in general. And so I know in this particular project, it explicitly said that React Router was outside the scope, that the team had decided that was outside the scope. But so would you look out for something like this explicitly called out, and anything else is fair game, or do you approach these take homes as just use vanilla JavaScript or vanilla React, or are you allowed to
My
bring
answer,
in these
as you heard from Nick when I was interviewing Nick, is it depends. But generally, I look out for explicit boundaries in any take home, because if someone set them, they're there for a reason. And the reason that we set them, we at TCL in this instance set that boundary, is because we wanted to reduce the amount of time you needed to set up and get something working. So that might be one of the goals of the company that is interviewing you, is that they have things they want to see that are more important to them than proof that you can use a given library. In this case, we wanted to optimize for what we think is a common experience when you're doing a take home, which is you have to make a request to an API and render some data as a result of that request. That was more important to me as somebody who helped to design this take home than the React Router thing. And also the router thing would just have taken more time, that the value for the return on investment wouldn't be that high, in my opinion. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I guess in the future, maybe just the rule of thumb is to just ask, right? Ask the people that designed it.
If you're not sure of the boundaries, you can ask, but my process is generally to assume that I don't want to add too many toys on top of whatever basic foundation was explicitly called out or provided in the take home or in whatever challenge they're setting, whether it's a take home or a live thing. So use your best judgment, but also you can always ask for clarity. It's not going to be a bad thing if you ask, should I do X, Y, or Z to build out this project?
Shows your thought process. It shows that you're thinking
Mhm.
about it and that you understand the bigger picture. I
Yeah.
would probably recommend, only because I did this and it worked and got me my job. If you have the time and if you feel confident in what you're doing, add one little thing, because it'll be a place to
Mhm.
talk about so that you can sort of guide the conversation. I think, Nick, you did it where you didn't have to add the extra information about the picture on that page. That was a couple lines of code, nothing super sophisticated, but it gives him the opportunity to say, I added this because, user experience. It just made sense to me to have it there, and then move on. But just having that moment to be able to illustrate your thought process, beyond just the acceptance criteria. And I don't mean doing anything wild. I had a take home that said, make a button, make an obnoxious button. Right.
Mhm.
So there was no request to do anything else but make a button that was an ugly color. I made it pulse. It was one line of CSS, and I said, how much more obnoxious can you get, or something. And it was just something little, if you can throw in there to put your own. Don't go
Yeah.
totally off the rails, but something that you can talk about. That shows that you're thinking about the project as a whole. And it's not
Yeah.
just the homework assignment where you have to meet every single thing exactly as.
Yeah, and you definitely didn't need to do like the history stuff I did. We didn't get into it, but I kind of wanted to talk about this progressive enhancement story, where, because I'm using the URLs, but if you actually submitted it to the server, you would still get a URL. So that's why I kind of did it. But also, I thought it'd just be fun to show it a bit. But it's
Mhm.
that's definitely, and if I was interviewing, I would probably do something like that to just make myself stand out. I try to do something to stand out when I can, or explain something. It's not required, but I only mention that because, like, I know it's very difficult in the job market right now, and again, I don't
Mhm.
mean make your app have lasers come out of it and stuff. It's just, I thought it'd also just be fun to talk about it with EJ, so that's why I did it as
Yeah.
well. So
No, I agree. And we don't have time to go into it, but just because I left the thread dangling, one thing I would have asked Nick about, from an interview perspective, is every time a React component re-renders, right, all the code inside that component theoretically gets rerun. And I wanted to ask Nick if there was a way he could prevent some unnecessary work that he created in the app component, with the way he bound his events. So we can talk about that if everyone has time to talk about it, but otherwise we can leave it as an exercise for everyone to take home.
yeah.
What could you do to prevent unnecessary work, which probably isn't a big deal for an app this size, for the record. Like, nothing serious is going to happen, but there's something that I would do if I were on Nick's team and reviewing that code. Like, maybe you just forgot this, maybe you didn't know about it, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
But we don't have to crack open the code again. I just wanted to bring up, since I left the thread dangling, I did have one more thing I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. No, it's a good call, because like unnecessary renders, and also there's some misunderstanding about re-renders too. It doesn't necessarily mean it's good when it re-renders, doesn't mean it's going to actually change the page.
Mhm.
Like, there's something called the virtual DOM, which me and EJ can send some links if you'd like. But there's definitely ways to prevent the re-rendering, and it's also how you approach building the component too. Sometimes that, like, you don't necessarily need to use fancy things. That you could, even just the way the component is architected can actually be kind of built in a way that it actually doesn't cause a re-render. So there's,
Mhm.
But it's the usual. It depends. Senior people don't like saying it depends for fun. It's a real thing. So just
we're not doing it just to be contrarians or just to make you think at home.
Yeah.
It's because it really does depend on so many variables. If there's I work in accessibility as a specialty, and there's a joke that if you get 3 of us in the room with a question of accessibility, there will be 5 answers. And it sort of multiplies with n getting bigger and bigger. Any other questions or any comments or concerns even that you want to address before you start going off and scheduling interviews this week? Anyone?
I have another question. So in
Please.
the events like where you aren't, able to fulfill the take-home assignment, any like pointers on how to address that? Like where you just got stuck and just
Yeah.
bombed it.
Speaking first, focusing on the experience we want you to have in this particular case. our goal, again, is just to get you to have this practice of the interview experience. So for us, don't worry about it so much. We really want to get you to experience the feeling and the reality of being in the situation of your being interviewed. So try to de-stress for that as much as possible. But in general, like Nick said before, you can spin it into, oh, I didn't finish because I was focused on this feature that was really important to me, or I had a question and I kind of fell down a rabbit hole. It's kind of a little shady in my opinion, but the goal of a lot of take homes isn't necessarily to prove that you can complete every single thing in the acceptance criteria. They give you a full list of acceptance criteria so that the goals are understood to you, ideally, but the success benchmark is not necessarily that you did complete all of the acceptance criteria. It could be a bit before that point. Does that make sense? Nick, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I was just going to give a concrete example. When I interviewed at Netlify, I did not finish the take home. There was the take home wasn't really it was more to do it. It was kind of more a live code discussion kind of thing. But like I basically spinned it into a conversation as opposed to like we did a bit of code, but I also said like what I was saying before about just starting a conversation, because then you get in this collaborative mode, and every time I've done it, the interviewer actually starts, well, let's try this. Or I remember one interview, they're like, oh, I think you're missing something there. Like they're telling me, like, whereas it's supposed to be me that's doing all this. So like, I think anytime, I'm not going to say this will always happen, but like just trying to go into that collaborative mode has been super positive for me anytime I've done it. I will also preface this with, I am a white guy in tech, so there was a lot of things I don't have to worry about. So I understand that as well, but I still wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, and one more thing too is that it's also just a fact that not everyone writes code at the same raw pace as everyone else. So the take home experience could be different for you depending on how quickly you write code. But if you can show that you have an entire thought process developed behind what you would do, that can be valuable to the right people. And we would hope, you've heard me and Nick and Shelly all separately talk about the kinds of places that are green flags. And so I would hope that it wouldn't matter to an interviewer that you didn't check off all the boxes. And that's the kind of thing you want to lean on, but we can't guarantee that that's true. Some people will have very hard requirements that you did complete all the AC because they think it is reasonable to do X amount of work in 1 given hour or in 2 given hours. I don't think that's true or accurate to how the real world works, but that's not the world we live in. So I can't wait until I can wave a magic wand and fix things I don't like. I can only be practical about my advice.
Yeah.
Excellent advice. I'm going to take this opportunity to stop recording. We could probably talk all day, and I know I would like to, but to honor everybody's time, thank you so much for coming. Nick and EJ, thank you so much for doing this. The recording will be posted in a little while. And again, reach out if you need anything. This was our last synchronous thing before on Zoom before we meet on Sunday for your graduation and our wrap-up party. Anyway, thanks everyone so much.
Yeah, thanks
Bye
everybody.
everyone. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Shelly.
Thanks everybody.